From Southwark Mysteries playwright John Constable, a first poetry collection, Spark in the Dark, published by Thin Man Press.
In honour of Dylan Thomas, since it's his centenary of his birth. Mrs. God. When we were young, in the land of song, the preacher ruled with a rod. He frankly advised us never to fool with the affections of one Mr. God, who was Lord of the Valley. In fact, he designed it, only something had somehow gone wrong, so that now Mr. God was said to be minded to call it a day before long. And maiden Aunt Mimi would suck her false teeth, purse-lipped, with a meaningful nod, as if to infer that the root of the mischief was the behaviour of young Mrs. God. Oh, you'd think she'd be sitting pretty in her mansion on the hill, all mod cons, fitted kitchen, and her antidepressant pills. But oh no, it's all too humdrum. She's got pent-up frustration. Joins the village Amdram, gets ideas above her station. Oh yes, she craves sensation. Our local Amdram diva. They say she's had relations with that Paki. Dr. Shiva. Dr. Shiva, born Mumbai. Tall, handsome, dark physician. I bet you they don't even do the missionary position. Mimi said that she was cheap. Oh, some would call it trashy. Shared a bath with Dr. Shiva, with plenty splishy splashy. Aunt Mimi said it would end in tears. Now I hear she's knocking round with weirdos and queers. Mr. God tried to advise, but oh no, she wouldn't listen. Too busy making eyes at some flipping jazz musician. The jazzer's name was Dave. His eyes were red and bleary. He introduced her to the works of a certain Dr. Leary. Yeah. Then Mrs. God dropped acid. She was Mrs. God delirious. She thought it was a gas. But then it all got serious. Mrs. God got flirty. Mrs. God got flighty. Went running round the garden in her pink nylon nightie. Mrs. God got flighty. Mrs. God got flirty. Mrs. God started living like she wanted to die before she's 30. Because Mr. God got shirty. When she didn't fetch his dinner, he gets up on his high horse and he calls his wife a sinner. But she just, compared to you, I'm an absolute beginner. Oh, but isn't it divine to own these human imperfections? Mr. God calls Dr. Jones. Mrs. God gets sectioned. Mr. God, he lost the plot. Mr. God, he hit the bottle, parked his car in a vacant lot with the engine on full throttle. Mr. God, gone on the rampage. Mr. God caught molesting a sheep. Mr. God going around making promises he's in no position to keep. Mr. God got the midnight rambles. Mr. God got a mouth flecked with foam. The lights are on in Mr. God's house, but nobody home. There are even dark tales told to strangers in bars of how, having dug his own hole, one desolate night alone neath the stars, with naught but his sheep-shagger soul. Oh, and this is mere speculation, mind, for they found no grisly remains. Mr. God put his shotgun in Mr. God's mouth and blew out Mr. God's brains. So they say. Me, I doubt. All we know is no one's seen them. Some say the whole point of Mrs. God's sin is so as Mr. God's son can redeem them. Let's hope they work it out, like good father and mother. Let's hope they learn to love, honour and respect one another. Let Mr. God forgive her. Well, granted, she's no angel. Only maybe Mr. God ought to consider his own part in her downfall. Let Mr. God relent. Let him weep and kiss and hug her. Let him repent for being such a miserable old bugger. Let Mrs. God pretend. And let Mr. God believe her. That she'll love him till the end. And that he's her Dr. Shiva. And then let us, their children, live to transcend these works of the great deceiver.